Greetings, weary traveler, and welcome to this snug alcove of history. Before we journey back to the merciless winters of medieval times, I extend a heartfelt welcome to you, dear listener. Whether you're curled beneath blankets, drifting towards slumber, or simply unwinding with tales from the past, I'm delighted you've joined me tonight. If you'd like, share where you're tuning in from and the hour gracing your corner of the world. Drop a comment below. It's always a joy to see our global community of history enthusiasts gathered here. And if you relish these soothing, immersive stories, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter. Now, let the stresses of modern life dissolve as we travel back to an era when winter's icy grasp wasn't just an inconvenience, but a fight for survival. Picture the European countryside in the Middle Ages. Barren trees, their last leaves long fallen, and a pallid sun hanging low, its feeble rays doing little to ease the biting chill. Frost crunches underfoot as the first snowflakes dance on a bitter breeze. Winter is coming, and for these people, it spells unrelenting hardship. The cold creeps in slowly but lingers for months, transforming the land into a frozen wasteland. Rivers solidify into glassy sheets. Ponds become slabs of ice. Without central heating or insulated homes, warmth is a distant dream for all but the elite. Yet medieval winters weren't always this brutal. Once, seasons followed a predictable rhythm, and snow was met with quiet acceptance, not dread. Then came the shift, the Little Ice Age, a climatic anomaly spanning the 14th to 19th centuries. Its causes remain debated, but its effects were undeniable. Crops failed, livestock perished, and icy winds sharpened like knives. One infamous example was the Great Frost of 1709. Temperatures plunged so low that London's Thames became a frozen highway, with vendors setting up stalls and even lighting fires atop the ice. A surreal spectacle, yes, but one paid for in lives. Countless perished, frozen in their own homes. Yet amid the suffering, some found unexpected solace. Take young Isaac Newton, forced home from Cambridge during the frost. By the fireside, with time to ponder, he laid the groundwork for calculus and optics. Who knows how many other great minds were forged in winter's quiet isolation. For most, however, winter was a season of endurance, not enlightenment. The wealthy donned thick woolens and stockpiled firewood, but peasants faced a grimmer reality. Imagine waking in a one-room cottage, smoke stinging your eyes, your breath fogging the frigid air. You rise from a straw mattress, careful not to disturb your shivering family. Breakfast? A scant bowl of porridge or stale bread, with harvest stores dwindling. Outside, livestock huddle in barns, their coats matted with frost. Survival meant back-breaking labor, gathering firewood until your hands cracked, all while imagining your children's pinched faces. Yet even in such hardship, resilience flickered. Medieval life was deeply tied to nature's rhythms, marked by rituals and celebrations. The Feast of St. Stephen on December 26th offered a rare reprieve. Hierarchies inverted, a peasant crowned Lord of Misrule, and revelry filling the air with food, drink, and laughter. A fleeting escape from austerity. But winter's true lifeline was community. Villages banded together. Families crowded around hearths, sharing stories and scraps. Neighbors traded firewood or stew. In the firelight, faces showed weariness but also determination. They'd survived winters past. They'd survived this one. And when spring's first signs emerged, the faint lengthening of days, the softening earth, it was met with joy we can scarcely fathom. Plow Monday marked winter's end, with blessed plows cutting fresh furrows into thawing soil. Relief was palpable. Life, however hard, would begin anew. Their resilience humbles our modern comforts. Next time you shiver on a cold day, remember those who came before, their struggles, their triumphs, their unbreakable spirit. For in their darkest nights, they clung to one truth. No matter how fierce the winter, spring always follows. Even the privileged were not spared winter's wrath. Drafty castles, ill-equipped for the season's fury, forced royal households into logistical nightmares. Mountains of firewood were stockpiled to feed roaring hearths, the sole source of heat. Kitchen staff toiled endlessly, preserving meats and grains to sustain the court through lean months. Servants scurried to seal every crack against the creeping chill. Yet even meticulous preparations often failed. Take the tragic tale of Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, found frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle meant to shelter her. Such grim fates underscored winter's indiscriminate cruelty. Yet amid the bleakness, humanity endured, kindling hope in unexpected places. For many, that flicker came during the Feast of St. Stephen, a midwinter revelry on December 26th. This celebration offered peasants a rare sanctioned escape from drudgery. Central to it was the tradition of misrule, where social hierarchies flipped. A commoner, crowned Lord of Misrule, issued playful edicts to their betters. For one raucous day, lords and laborers feasted as equals, their laughter cutting through winter's gloom. This wasn't mere diversion, it was survival. The bonds forged here fortified communities against the season's toll. A chronicle from 1377 recounts two peasant families, their winter stores exhausted, sharing a meager St. Stephen's Day meal. That act of generosity carried them through winter's remaining ravages. Such compassion was medieval society's marrow, a helping hand to a frostbitten traveler, an extra log for a widow, often meant life or death. Winter's shared struggle bred a culture of interdependence that defied feudal divisions. Yet even the warmest camaraderie couldn't halt winter's march. After St. Stephen's fleeting joy came January's bleak slog, then February's gnawing hunger. As hearths dimmed and bellies hollowed, spring's promise seemed a taunt. Still, year after year, they endured. Their resilience echoes in the first thaw's relief, the drip of icicles, the soft earth beneath snow. Plow Monday, the agricultural year's start, was a testament to that tenacity. Villagers blackened their faces with soot for luck, parading plows through muddy lanes, singing to wake the soil. For us, winter is a thermostat adjustment. For them, it was existential. Our ancestors faced it armed only with grit and community. No thermal socks, no grocery apps. When we grumble over delayed trains or slushy sidewalks, their legacy whispers, "You've forgotten how to winter." Their survival wasn't just physical, it was a defiance of despair. In drafty hovels and smoky halls, they passed stories like torches, kindling hope. So tonight, as you burrow into your electric blanket, remember those who huddled in straw beds, listening to wolves howl. Remember the child who traded a crust with a friend, the widow who gave her cloak. Their winter was a siege, yet they rationed kindness like firewood. And when spring came, oh, the unbridled joy. Crocuses piercing frost, oxen straining at plows, the very air thick with renewal. We are their heirs. Our comfort is their triumph. Let's honor it by facing our winters, literal or metaphorical, with their stubborn grace. For as they knew, however deep the snow, it melts. Always. The medieval winter was a relentless predator, stalking both castle and cottage with equal malice. While peasants suffered most cruelly, even stone-walled fortresses became icy prisons for the nobility. Grand halls designed for summer's breezes turned treacherous in winter, their towering ceilings trapping cold air like wells, while dampness seeped through mortar joints with insidious persistence. Servants constantly battled the elements, hanging tapestries over arrow slits and laying rush matting on freezing flagstones, all while their breath hung visible in the air before them. Royalty paid dearly for winter's siege. King Henry II of England reportedly burned an entire oak chair in desperation, just to warm his royal backside for a few precious moments. The logistics of keeping a castle habitable were staggering. A single noble household could consume entire forests worth of firewood between November and March. Accounts from Durham Priory show they burned through 200 cartloads of wood each winter just to keep the scriptorium warm enough for ink to flow. For the peasantry, winter's cruelty was more visceral. Imagine young Tom, a village lad with chapped cheeks ruddy from the wind, delivering his family's last sack of peas to old Agnes the widow. Her cottage reeks of damp straw and wood smoke as she huddles under threadbare blankets, her joints swollen with rheumatism. The fire has died because her hands shake too badly to strike flint. Tom's gift of fuel and food is literal salvation, but he knows his own family will go hungrier for it. This was winter's paradox. It drove communities together even as it starved them apart. The same cold that forced families to sleep piled together like puppies also made them hoard their dwindling supplies. Church almoners recorded heartbreaking choices. Fathers deciding which child got the last crust, mothers selling their hair for a handful of grain. The winter of 1315 saw peasants in Yorkshire eating clay to fill their stomachs, while in London, the poor gnawed on discarded parchment from law courts. Yet in this landscape of deprivation, moments of light persisted. The Lord of Misrule, tradition wasn't just sanctioned rebellion, it was psychological survival. When the lowliest shepherd could order the local baron to dance a jig or drink until he stumbled, it temporarily melted the frost of social stratification. Court records show these revels sometimes got out of hand. A 1392 account from Chester describes a misrule king who demanded the bishop's horse and robes, resulting in a drunken chase through the cathedral close. The cold also bred innovation. Peasants developed smoke baths, sitting naked near the hearth while smoke cured winter ailments. They stuffed shoes with dried moss for insulation and rendered pork fat into primitive chapstick. In monasteries, monks perfected the art of winter gardening, using manure-heated hotbeds to grow winter greens. These small triumphs against the elements became folk wisdom passed through generations. As February's gloom deepened, survival became a calculus of calories versus labor. Should you burn energy chopping wood or conserve strength by enduring the cold? The elderly often chose the latter. Parish death registers show predictable spikes during prolonged freezes. But even in death, winter's grip showed no mercy. Frozen ground made burials impossible, so churches became makeshift morgues, the dead stacked like cordwood until the thaw. Through it all, the promise of Plow Monday sustained them. The ceremonial first plowing wasn't just agriculture, it was faith made visible. When the oxen finally dragged that blessed plowshare through iron-hard earth, it was a declaration that life would continue. The villagers' cracked voices singing ancient planting hymns carried more than melody. They carried the stubborn heartbeat of humanity itself. We moderns, with our heated cars and grocery delivery, can scarcely comprehend such raw perseverance. Our winter complaints about delayed flights or high heating bills would have made a medieval peasant weep with bewildered laughter. Yet their legacy isn't just suffering. It's the astonishing adaptability of the human spirit. They remind us that warmth isn't just a physical state, but a communal achievement. One log shared, one story told, one more dawn endured together. Disease stalked the medieval winter like a spectral assassin, slipping through the cracks of crowded hovels and drafty castles alike. In the close quarters of peasant dwellings, where humans, livestock, and vermin shared the same fetid air, a simple winter cold could spiral into deadly pneumonia within days. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles describe entire villages struck down by the winter fever, their death rattles drowned out by howling blizzards. Medical knowledge offered little defense. Physicians clung to Galen's theory of humors, bleeding weakened patients or prescribing hot foods like garlic to balance the cold season's influence. A 14th century doctor's journal from Montpellier recommends swallowing powdered emerald as protection against winter ailments, a remedy only the wealthy could afford. For the poor, folk medicine prevailed. Onion poultices for chest complaints, fermented mare's milk for digestion, and the ever-present threat of the cure being worse than the disease. Children suffered most terribly. Parish records from Lincolnshire show that nearly half of all burials between December and March were for children under 5. The bone-laced tradition, tying black ribbons to sick infants' wrists as makeshift shrouds, speaks to winter's cruel predictability. In 1438, a Norwich mother was recorded burying 3 children in a single January week, their small bodies wrapped in the same threadbare blanket. Even royalty couldn't buy immunity. When Queen Jane Seymour died 2 weeks after giving birth to the future Edward VI, court physicians blamed an imbalance of winter phlegm. In truth, the Tudor palace's stone floors and damp tapestries created perfect conditions for puerperal fever. The tragic irony? Henry VIII had installed revolutionary fireplaces of the new fashion at Hampton Court that very winter, but no amount of innovation could outwit medieval microbes. The weather itself became a disease vector. The Great Famine of 1315 to 17 began with unrelenting winter rains that rotted seed grain in the ground. Starvation weakened populations then fell prey to ergodism, a fungal infection of rye that caused convulsions and gangrene. Contemporary accounts describe sufferers crawling through frozen streets, their blackened limbs snapping off at the joints. In Würzburg, desperate townspeople allegedly exhumed and ate plague victims from previous years, only to contract the disease anew. Yet winter also forged medical advances. Monastic infirmaries developed early isolation wards, separating fever patients with wool curtains soaked in vinegar. The 12th century nun Hildegard of Bingen prescribed sunlight exposure and herbal steam baths for winter melancholy, a precursor to understanding seasonal affective disorder. At St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London, winter was the one time physicians could practice anatomy, as frozen corpses kept longer before decomposition. The season's psychological toll was equally devastating. The Norse sagas speak of Fimbulwinter, the endless winter that precedes Ragnarok, a myth born from very real seasonal despair. In 1408, the chronicler Thomas Walsingham described Londoners gone mad with winter, citing cases of self-immolation and infanticide during particularly brutal cold snaps. The church tried to combat this with St. Lucy's Day celebrations on December 13th, a festival of lights meant to reassure believers that darkness would retreat. Ironically, winter's very deadliness spurred societal progress. The labor shortages following pandemics like the Black Death improved workers' bargaining power. Winter food storage needs drove innovations in salting, smoking, and brewing. Even our modern holiday traditions, from Christmas trees to New Year's resolutions, have roots in medieval winter survival strategies. When spring finally came, the relief was almost religious in its intensity. The 15th century Song of the Thrush describes peasants weeping at the first birdsong after a hard winter. But survivors carried invisible scars: the widow who always hoarded extra grain, the shepherd who couldn't feel his toes anymore, the children who learned too young how hunger gnaws. Today, when we pop vitamin D supplements or complain about seasonal allergies, we do well to remember winter's medieval victims. Their suffering shaped our world in ways we rarely acknowledge, from labor laws to medical ethics. The next time you curse a snow delay or a chilly office, picture Brother William in his freezing infirmary, changing bandages with numb fingers, or young Tom giving his last loaf to old Agnes. Our winter comforts were bought with their winter sacrifices. Winter transformed medieval warfare into a theater of absurd suffering. Armored knights, once glorious in summer campaigns, became shivering statues as their steel plate leached body heat like a greedy lover. The 100 Years' War chronicles described French soldiers urinating on their own gauntlets, not in disrespect, but to melt frozen buckles with momentary warmth. Horses fared worse. Their breath froze into icicles on their muzzles as they stumbled through snowdrifts, their iron shoes offering no purchase on icy terrain. The Welsh rebel Owain Glyndwr mastered winter warfare with brutal ingenuity. During the winter of 1401, his forces lured English troops into snowbound mountain passes, then vanished like ghosts into blizzards they knew how to navigate. The stranded English, their chainmail shirts transformed into icy cages, were found days later, their corpses arranged in macabre tableaus, some clutching each other for warmth, others with swords still raised against the storm that killed them. Siege warfare reached new heights of horror in winter. The 1240 siege of Kiev saw Mongol invaders catapulting frozen corpses over the walls, a biological weapon before the term existed. Defenders at Chateau Gallard in 1203 resorted to drinking their own horse's blood when snowmelt became contaminated. And during the infamous Winter War of 1311, Swiss mercenaries reportedly slept standing up in shifts, fearing if they laid down in the snow they'd never rise again. Yet winter could also be the great equalizer. In 1069, William the Conqueror's harrying of the north campaign stalled when his Norman knights, accustomed to milder winters, found themselves outmaneuvered by Saxon guerrillas on ice-covered rivers. The Bayou Tapestry's winter scenes show this reversal. Proud cavalry reduced to leading their mounts like beggars, their nasal helmets crusted with snot ice. The season birthed strange innovations. Russian chronicles describe snow forts built with layers of water-glazed snow that became harder than wood. Scandinavian berserkers allegedly chewed winter mushrooms, likely Amanita muscaria, to induce feverish warmth before battle. And the Swiss developed specialized crampons called wolf's teeth that let their pikemen scale frozen alpine passes. Logistics became nightmares. Supply trains needed 3 times the normal oxen to pull carts through snow, yet arrived with half the provisions, the rest consumed by starving drivers. The 1428 siege of Orleans saw besiegers and besieged alike roasting rats on broken lances. A Burgundian account describes soldiers gambling with dice carved from their own frozen feces. For common soldiers, winter service meant a special hell. English longbowmen, required to practice weekly even in winter, developed permanent shoulder deformities from drawing frozen bowstrings. Crossbowmen's hands fused to their weapons' metal components. Field surgeons kept buckets of snow handy for emergency amputations. The luckiest were those assigned to fire watch, not for enemy attacks, but to prevent comrades from burning the camp's own supplies for warmth. Winter's aftermath lingered like a phantom limb. Spring thaws revealed battlefields where the dead had been preserved in grotesque tableaus, a French knight still astride his starved horse, a cluster of archers frozen mid-retreat. These winter soldiers became local legends, their icy corpses sometimes remaining upright until May. Modern military historians estimate medieval armies lost more men to winter than to swords. Yet this suffering birthed enduring tactics, the Russian general winter strategy, the Swiss alpine warfare traditions, even the modern concept of winter gear inspections. When modern soldiers don thermal underwear or apply anti-fogging agents to their goggles, they're benefiting from medieval misery. So when you see a picturesque snowfall this winter, remember the 14th century mercenary who wrote in his journal, "God's tears freeze before they hit the ground here." Our romanticized winter wonderland was their killing field, a season that turned steel brittle, blood sluggish, and mercy non-existent. The only warmth came from the knowledge that if you survived till spring, you'd earned the right to call yourself a soldier. Winter's icy fingers reached deep into the medieval soul, reshaping faith and folklore with every howling blizzard. Church frescoes from the period show Christ not on the cross, but shivering in a stable, a deliberate parallel to congregations rubbing frostbitten hands during midnight mass. In York Minster, priests kept communion wine in special winter flasks to prevent freezing, while altar boys were tasked with breathing on the sacramental bread to keep it pliable enough to break. The season birthed its own mythology. Scandinavian sagas spoke of the Jollikaturen, a monstrous winter cat that devoured lazy children, while alpine villages told of the Schneemutter, a snow goddess who demanded annual sacrifices. These weren't mere stories. In 1427, a Swiss valley reportedly drowned an elderly woman in an icy lake to repay the snow spirits for a mild winter. The line between folklore and survival strategy blurred completely. Monastic life adapted in extraordinary ways. At Cluny Abbey, monks developed a winter alphabet, hand signals for silent communication when frozen lips couldn't form words. The famous Codex Venator depicts scribes writing with special ink containing antifreeze made from beetroot alcohol. Even prayer changed. The Litany of Cold included petitions like, "From the ice that cracks the chalice, deliver us, O Lord." For women, winter brought unique burdens. Childbirth in unheated chambers saw mortality rates spike. The 12th century Trotula text advised midwives to keep birthing stools away from drafts. Laundry became a torture. Village laws from Normandy show women being excused from washing duties when temperatures drop below -10 degrees Celsius, their hands already raw from scrubbing frozen cloth. Yet winter also granted temporary power. With men away at war or winter hunting, women managed entire villages. A 1395 ledger from Burgundy lists a winter council of matrons who allocated food stores and settled disputes. The animal kingdom suffered alongside humans. Falconers fitted their birds with leather snow boots, while wealthy ladies carried lapdogs in special heated boxes. More practically, oxen wore nailed shoes for icy fields, and beehives were wrapped in straw coats. But the most poignant adaptation belonged to the winter ravens of Tower of London. Their wings clipped to prevent escape, They became dependent on guards who'd trained them to peck ice from the moat for drinking water. Architecture fought back against the cold. Winter rooms in castles featured double walls stuffed with dried moss, while peasant homes built fire benches, stone seating positioned to absorb hearth heat. The innovative Stube, heated parlor, spread from Germany across Europe, its tile stove becoming a status symbol. But these comforts came at a cost. The 1382 collapse of a Strasbourg guild hall, overloaded with winter heating equipment, killed 300 people celebrating St. Nicholas Day. Food preservation became high art. The wealthy enjoyed snow cellars, underground chambers where January's harvest would keep until July. A surviving 15th century English recipe describes winter salad made from 20 preserved vegetables layered in barrels. But the poor relied on dangerous improvisation. In 1431, an entire Breton village was poisoned by rotten fish stored in snow contaminated with wolfsbane. The winter economy thrived on suffering. Icewool yarn spun from fibers stiffened by frozen water commanded premium prices. Apothecaries sold winter teeth, carved bone dentures that didn't crack in cold like ivory. And the infamous frost pennies of Bohemia contained extra silver to prevent coins from shattering when dropped. When spring finally came, the celebrations carried echoes of trauma. The Swiss Bug tradition, burning a snowman effigy, originated as catharsis for winter's victims. English villages held cuckoo fairs where people paid to hear the season's first bird call. And in Scandinavia, the winter thread ceremony saw families symbolically cutting the last wool spun during dark months. Today's winter traditions, from Christmas markets to snow festivals, are pale imitations of medieval necessity. Our heated homes have made us forget how winter once shaped language. The English window comes from Norse vindage, wind-eye. Law, the 12th century winter code, dictated property boundaries by snowdrifts and even personal names. The proliferation of frost surnames in 14th century records. As you adjust your thermostat this winter, consider the medieval mother who whispered the old Saxon charm against frost. Wind be gentle, snow be light, may the morning bring us light. Their winter was a living thing to be bargained with, feared, and ultimately survived, not just a season to be waited out. Winter's frozen grip extended its reach into the very legal systems of medieval Europe, transforming courtrooms into theaters of glacial justice. In 12th century Norway, the frostbathing law decreed that lawsuits could only be tried when the magistrate's breath was visible in the air, a crude but effective method to ensure officials weren't sleeping during proceedings. English sheriffs developed the practice of winter justice, postponing trials until spring thaw when roads became passable, leaving prisoners to shiver in unheated dungeons where ink froze in pots and quills snapped like icicles. The season created bizarre legal loopholes. A 1348 Parisian court excused a thief who stole firewood, ruling that winter necessity superseded property rights. Conversely, Bavarian laws imposed double penalties for crimes committed during blizzards, considering the weather an accomplice to evil. The most peculiar case comes from Iceland, where a 1423 ruling declared that a man who killed his neighbor during a snow blindness episode should be tried only after the sun returns to witness properly. Punishments took on winter's cruel character. The ice stool punishment forced debtors to sit naked on frozen mill wheels until they confessed or lost consciousness. In the Alps, condemned prisoners were given a snow choice: execution or being abandoned on a glacier with only a wool blanket. Records show about 1 in 5 chose the latter, their frozen bodies sometimes discovered centuries later by modern climbers. Winter even shaped warfare laws. The 1410 Winter Truce Accord between Poland and Lithuania required both sides to stop fighting when temperatures dropped below -15 degrees Celsius, though cheating was rampant. Teutonic knights were caught using heated armor to fake compliance. More pragmatically, the Swiss snow banner tradition allowed armies to surrender without dishonor if their standard became too frozen to wave. The cold warp time itself. Frozen church clocks in Burgundy led to the 1372 Winter Hour Ordinance, which divided daylight into frost hours, shorter in winter, and thaw hours. This chaotic system saw some villages holding mass at what was technically midnight by summer reckoning. Not until the 16th century would mechanical clocks overcome winter's tyranny over timekeeping. Trade underwent winter metamorphosis. The Hanseatic League developed ice coins, lead tokens exchanged when real silver froze to merchants' gloves. Venetian gondoliers switched to sled runners in frozen canals, creating temporary ice streets that changed the city's traffic patterns. Most remarkably, English wool merchants discovered that freezing their shipments actually improved quality, the secret behind the famed winter weave that made Chaucer's merchants so wealthy. Art and literature bore winter's mark. The 15th century Winter Book of Hours depicted biblical scenes with characters in contemporary winter gear. Noah building his ark wearing fur-lined boots, the Magi traveling with sleighs instead of camels. Troubadours composed winter lays, where courtly love gave way to practical advice. One surviving lyric lists 17 ways to reuse frozen chamber pot contents, including as mortar for urgent repairs. Even the divine wasn't spared winter's touch. Church frescoes in the Alps show angels with frostbitten wings, while a remarkable Norwegian stave church carving depicts the Virgin Mary knitting socks for the baby Jesus. The veneration of winter saints, like Sebaldus of Nuremberg, said to have melted snow with his prayers, reached fever pitch during particularly brutal seasons. Language itself froze and cracked under the strain. Middle English developed dozens of winter-specific terms now lost to us. Snudging, the act of breathing on someone to warm them. Glack, the moment when a frozen lock finally gives way. And the haunting tharmsic, the particular melancholy of seeing your breath in the air day after day. Modernity has erased most winter's legal and cultural imprints, but traces remain. Our snow days echo medieval winter truces, and the phrase cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey originates from naval guns freezing in place. When we complain about winter commuting, we're participating in a 1,000-year-old tradition of seasonal grievance. As you scrape ice off your windshield this winter, consider the medieval judge who literally had to watch his words freeze in midair before passing sentence. Their winter wasn't just weather. It was a force that rewrote laws, reshaped time, and reminded everyone, from king to peasant, that nature always has the final verdict. Winter's frozen fingers crept into the very fabric of medieval childhood, turning what should have been years of wonder into a brutal fight for survival. Swaddled infants in unheated chambers faced mortality rates that would horrify modern parents. Parish records from 14th century Norwich show that nearly 60% of winter-born babies never saw their first spring. Those who survived bore permanent marks of their ordeal. Archaeologists identify winter lines in medieval skeletons, subtle bone deformities caused by childhood rickets for months without sunlight. The season transformed children's daily lives with cruel ingenuity. Schoolrooms became torture chambers where ink froze in pots and wax tablets cracked like autumn leaves. A 1435 schoolmaster's journal from Bruges describes students taking turns sitting on the warm stone, a heated rock passed around like some glacial musical chair. Lessons themselves adapted. Mathematics problems calculated firewood rations, while grammar exercises conjugated Latin verbs for to shiver and to starve. Yet winter also birthed peculiar joys. Scandinavian children played gnatliker on frozen ponds, a brutal mix of hockey and wrestling where broken bones were considered marks of honor. In the Alps, boys competed in claw-off races, chasing wheels of cheese down snow-packed hills. Even the poorest peasant children found wonder in frost flowers. Intricate ice crystals formed on frozen puddles that served as nature's stained glass for those who couldn't visit real cathedrals. The wealthy employed elaborate strategies to protect their young. Venetian merchants commissioned winter cradles with copper bottoms that could be filled with hot water, while French aristocrats dressed their heirs in down. Early down jackets stuffed with goose plumage. The most extravagant was perhaps the Burgundian winter nursery, an entire room lined with wool-wrapped clay pipes circulating warm air from the kitchens below. But for every noble child cosseted in furs, there were 100 peasant children like young Marjorie Kemp, whose 14th century memoir describes waking to find her baby brother, blue as the Virgin's cloak from winter's kiss. Village lore brimmed with horror stories of children lost in blizzards, their tiny bodies sometimes found years later, perfectly preserved in glaciers like macabre snow dolls. Education took bizarre winter turns. Monastery schools taught ice writing, carving lessons into frozen ponds with styluses. The famous 12th century teacher Abelard recommended chewing garlic before winter recitations, believing it kept minds sharp and classmates at bay. In Scandinavia, rune masters taught children to carve messages on winter bark, birch strips that became flexible when frozen. Winter's grip on childhood extended even to play. The Snow Knight game had children building ice-armored effigies that would slowly melt to reveal hidden messages. German children played Schneekönig, Snow King, where the winner was whoever could stand barefoot on ice the longest, a game that frequently led to lost toes. More benign was the English winter piper tradition, where children would blow through hollowed icicles to create eerie music. The season shaped children's bodies and minds in ways we're only beginning to understand. Analysis of medieval children's teeth shows winter growth lines where malnutrition stunted development. The Old English term winter sad described not seasonal depression, but the permanent psychological shadow cast by too many brutal winters in formative years. Some of winter's childhood legacies endure. Our snow angels descend from the medieval snow shrines, where children shaped the Virgin's image. The Christmas tradition of hanging stockings originates with children leaving their shoes by the fire to dry, hopeful that St. Nicholas might fill them. Even the modern snowman has its roots in the Snow Judas effigies children built during Lenten winters. Today, when we fret about our children's screen time or sugar intake, medieval parents would laugh bitterly. Their winter parenting manual consisted of one brutal rule: keep them alive till spring. The next time you watch kids gleefully tumble in fresh snow, remember their medieval counterparts for whom snow wasn't recreation but mortality's white flag, and marvel at how far we've come. Winter's icy grasp reshaped medieval spirituality, turning faith into a physical struggle against the elements. Churches across Europe became fortresses against the cold, their very architecture bearing witness to winter's power. In the Alps, priests conducted mass wearing fur-lined chasubles with special mittens that allowed them to handle the frozen Eucharist. The famous Winter Madonna of Innsbruck, a statue whose painted tears were said to freeze on her cheeks each January, became a pilgrimage site for those desperate to prove their devotion could outlast the season. Monasteries developed extraordinary winter rituals. At Cluny Abbey, monks practiced snow meditation, sitting motionless in courtyards until their robes stiffened with ice, an act of penance believed to bring them closer to Christ's suffering. The Cistercians of Yorkshire took vows of winter silence, communicating only through sign language from Martimas to Candlemas, their breath forming ghostly words in the frigid air. Most extreme were the ice anchorites of Scandinavia, hermits who walled themselves into glacier caves for entire winters, surviving on lichen and melted snow. The cold warped religious art in startling ways. In Bavaria, winter altarpieces were painted with special pigments that changed color in freezing temperatures, the Virgin's blue cloak deepening to mournful black when the church grew coldest. English stonemasons carved shivering saints, whose draped robes appeared to tremble when viewed by flickering candlelight in icy chapels. Even stained glass adapted. York Minster's master glaziers added crushed oyster shells to the mix, creating windows that glittered like frost patterns when backlit by winter sun. Winter miracles took on special significance. The 12th century ice sermon of St. Godric described how he preached for 3 days on a frozen river without his feet thawing the ice. More practical was St. Wenceslaus' legendary winter wine, barrels that never froze, later discovered to contain dangerous levels of antifreeze-lead compounds. These stories weren't just folklore. They were psychological survival tools for communities facing months of darkness. The season transformed death rituals completely. In the Alps, snow burials became common, with corpses preserved in glacial tombs until spring thaw allowed proper interment. A macabre trade developed in winter relics, bodies of saints that didn't decompose in the cold, their frozen limbs snapped off as holy souvenirs. The most bizarre practice was the ice requiem of northern Germany, where choirs sang dirges into frozen lakes, believing the melodies would be preserved and released during spring thaw. Winter's influence extended to theological debates. The 14th century frost heresy argued that hell itself must freeze in winter, while radical Franciscans developed cold mysticism, the belief that shivering brought one closer to God. Even the papacy wasn't immune. Pope Boniface was nearly deposed in 1303 after failing to prevent the Tiber from freezing, a sign many took as divine displeasure. Modern winter religious traditions pale in comparison. Our Christmas lights are feeble imitations of the great frost candles that medieval churches hung from their eaves, lanterns filled with whale oil that could burn for weeks in freezing temperatures. The living nativity tradition began as literal survival theater, with villagers playing the Holy Family to earn shelter in churches during blizzards. When you next enter a warm modern church this winter, consider the medieval worshiper who knelt on stone floors so cold they burned like fire. Their faith wasn't abstract theology, but daily defiance of winter's killing grip, proof that even in the darkest season, the human spirit could still kindle flames of hope. Winter's final legacy lingers in our bones, a genetic memory of medieval resilience encoded in modern bodies. Scientists now identify the frost survival gene cluster, a set of DNA adaptations prevalent in descendants of northern Europeans that improved cold tolerance, fat metabolism, and seasonal depression resistance. These weren't gentle evolutionary tweaks, but brutal selections. The same genes that helped your ancestors survive the Little Ice Age may predispose you to winter weight gain today. The medieval winter diet left permanent marks on our physiology. The starvation metabolism that allowed peasants to survive on 800 calories a day now manifests as modern winter blues, when our bodies expect scarcity that never comes. Dental studies show medieval children developed thicker tooth enamel during winter famines, a biological armor against malnutrition that ironically makes their skeletons appear healthier than they were. Even our circadian rhythms still follow the winter sleep patterns established in drafty halls, where segmented nighttime waking, the origin of midnight and matin sleep, conserved precious body heat. Archaeology reveals winter's invisible casualties. Mass graves from the Great Famine show victims with telltale hunger grooves in their bones, while ice mummies like the famous Innsbruck Frost Maiden preserve the brutal reality of winter death. Her lungs still contain soot from months of inhaling smoky hearth air. Forensic analysis of medieval hair samples proves many survived on the edge of starvation. Nitrogen isotopes reveal they were literally consuming their own muscle tissue by spring. The season's psychological scars shaped cultures for centuries. The Scandinavian Vinterrad, Winter Council, tradition of group decision-making during crises evolved into modern consensus governance models. The English winter stare, that thousand-yard gaze seen in Bruegel's paintings, finds its echo in seasonal affective disorder research. Even our holiday feasting carries trauma. The compulsion to overeat in December appears strongest in regions hit hardest by medieval famines. Winter's architectural legacy surrounds us. The steep roofs of alpine chalets, designed to shed snow loads, inspired modern ski resorts. The winter cities of Scandinavia still use medieval principles of wind-blocking urban planning. London's Christmas lights follow the same routes as medieval dark walks, paths between fire beacons that guided travelers through frozen streets. Our language remains thick with winter's ghosts. The word window comes from Old Norse vindaga, wind-eye, recalling the animal bladder pains that strained winter light. Hibernate descends from peasant winter sleep, practices of drastically reduced activity. Even January carries the mark of Janus, the two-faced god who watched over both the dying winter and nascent spring. Modern winter comfort rests on medieval suffering. Central heating owes its existence to Cistercian monks' hypocaust systems. Your down jacket is a direct descendant of the do-down worn by Burgundian nobles. The very concept of winter sports grew from essential survival skills. What began as ice fishing and snowshoeing became recreational skiing and skating. As you scrape frost from your windshield this winter, remember the medieval parents who licked ice from their children's faces each morning. When you complain about heating bills, recall the serf who gave a day's labor for a single log. Our modern winter is their hard-won miracle, paid for in frozen tears and chilblained fingers across 500 winters. The greatest tribute we can offer those shivering ancestors isn't pity, but recognition that every cozy December evening, every steaming mug of cocoa, every snow day enjoyed safely indoors stands as victory over winter's ancient tyranny. Their suffering bought our comfort. Their endurance shaped our world. When the north wind howls tonight, listen closely. You might hear their voices whispering through the cracks in time. We survived. So will you. The medieval winter's echo reverberates through our modern climate crisis, creating eerie parallels between past and present. As glaciers retreat across Europe, they're revealing time capsules of the Little Ice Age, perfectly preserved peasant shoes, frozen livestock carcasses, and even entire alpine pastures buried for 6 centuries. These archaeological treasures come with a warning. The climate instability that devastated medieval societies now threatens our own. Dendrochronologists studying oak beams from Tudor buildings have identified the precise winters when English builders switched to faster-growing but inferior timber, a silent testament to desperate times when normal harvests failed. Modern science confirms what medieval chroniclers intuited. Ice core samples from Greenland show lead pollution dropping during the worst famine years, not because medieval people went green, but because so many died that metalworking ceased. The same cores reveal volcanic ash layers matching written accounts of years without summer, when eruptions like the 1257 Samalas event triggered global cooling. Today's climate scientists pore over medieval weather diaries with new respect, recognizing them as early climate data. A 14th century monk's observation that the Thames froze so thick they roasted an ox upon it helps calibrate modern temperature models. Winter's medieval lessons take on urgent new meaning. The Doomsday Book of 1086, William the Conqueror's Great Survey, now serves as a baseline for studying English ecosystem changes. Its records of now-vanished vineyards and olive groves show how much warmer England once was. Similarly, accounts of Norse settlements in Greenland describe farms that flourished for centuries before suddenly failing, a chilling case study in climate vulnerability. Our technological advantage over medieval ancestors may be smaller than we think. While we have satellites and supercomputers, they developed sophisticated early warning systems. The thickness of walnut shells predicted winter severity, migrating birds signaled approaching storms, and the behavior of smoke from hearth fires forecast temperature drops. Modern meteorologists are now studying these folk methods for insights about microclimate prediction. The greatest difference lies in our response. Where medieval societies adapted to climate change through brutal trial and error, developing winter wheat varieties, shifting trade routes, or in extreme cases resorting to cannibalism, we possess both the knowledge and means to act preemptively. The medieval warming period that allowed Viking colonization of Greenland, followed by the Little Ice Age that destroyed those settlements, stands as a monument to climate's power over human ambition. As you check your weather app this winter, consider the medieval farmer who studied pig spleens for the same purpose. When you adjust your smart thermostat, remember the serf who slept embracing his livestock for warmth. Our climate crisis may be global and anthropogenic, but our capacity for resilience was forged in those tiny, smoky hovels where humanity learned to outlast winter after winter. Their struggle lives on in us, not just as genetic memory, but as proof that even the darkest seasons end. The medieval winter's final lesson whispers to us through the centuries, not in parchment or stone, but in the very rhythm of our bones. Modern sleep scientists have identified what they call the Great Winter Sleep Disturbance, a persistent biological memory of those long-ago winters when humans hibernated in all but name. Our tendency to sleep longer yet more fitfully in winter, to crave carbohydrates when the temperature drops, even the way our skin pales in December, All are physiological echoes of ancestors who had to become winter creatures to survive. Medical imaging reveals how medieval bodies literally reshaped themselves to the cold. CT scans of well-preserved medieval remains show enlarged adrenal glands, the result of constant cold stress, and thickened arterial walls from years of blood vessel constriction. The famous Iceman Otzi, preserved for 5 millennia in alpine snow, shows identical adaptations, proving winter's sculpting hand worked across millennia. Modern people whose families hail from cold climates still share these traits, our bodies carrying winter's imprint like tree rings. The season carved itself into medieval minds as deeply as medieval flesh. The 14th century winter madness outbreaks, likely vitamin D deficiency-induced psychosis, left their mark in art like Bruegel's The Triumph of Death, where skeletal figures skate across frozen rivers of despair. Modern psychologists identify seasonal affective disorders' roots in what medieval people called winter sad, not just melancholy, but a profound metabolic slowing that made entire villages move like sleepwalkers through the darkest months. Yet winter also forged unexpected cognitive strengths. The Norse developed sea ice navigation, reading subtle patterns in frozen oceans like maps. Monastic scribes perfected microscript to conserve precious vellum during supply shortages. Even children's games like Fox and Geese, played on snow-etched boards, sharpened strategic thinking for spring planting. These weren't just survival skills, but evolutionary pressures that may have selected for specific types of intelligence. Our modern world still runs on medieval winter's clock. The financial quarter system originates from merchants closing their books when winter made trade impossible. The academic calendar's long summer break began as a necessity for medieval students to help with harvest before winter starvation set in. Even our holiday lights descend from the winter fires that once burned not for cheer, but to literally push back the darkness that could kill. As climate change alters winters worldwide, these ancient adaptations become maladaptations. Our winter weight genes now drive obesity epidemics. Our light-deprived brains, evolved for winter dormancy, struggle with modern productivity demands. The very traits that helped our ancestors survive now complicate our lives, a biological debt come due after centuries of deferred payment. The medieval winter's greatest gift may be perspective. When we complain about a cold snap or heavy snowfall, we're engaging in what historian Fernand Braudel called the conceit of the present, forgetting how recently winter was mortal danger rather than inconvenience. Those long-ago survivors left us more than just genetic legacy. They left the example that humans can endure far more than we imagine, so long as we remember winter always ends. So when next you wake to a frosted window, pause before reaching for the thermostat. Place your palm against the cold glass where a medieval mother once traced her child's name in condensation. Breathe deeply like those who measured winter not in days, but in stacked firewood and salted meat. And know that somewhere in your marrow still lives the unkillable truth it carved into frozen earth with numb fingers. This too shall pass. Winter's frozen fingerprints linger on our modern world in ways we scarcely notice. From the width of our door frames, originally built narrow to retain heat, to the very structure of our fairy tales. Scholars now recognize that many classic winter stories, Snow White's frozen sleep, the Snow Queen's icy palace, even Frosty the Snowman's magical existence, are cultural fossils preserving medieval survival wisdom. The Brothers Grimm collected these tales from villages where winter still killed the weak, where children truly needed warnings about wandering into blizzards or wasting food. The season-shaped language with surprising precision. English retains over 24 winter-specific verbs lost to most modern speakers. To snudge, walk while hugging oneself for warmth. To glack, when a frozen lock finally gives way. And the haunting unthaw, which paradoxically meant both to freeze and melt in medieval usage. Even our punctuation bears winter's mark. The Pilcrow paragraph originated as a C with a vertical bar through it, representing caput head. In medieval manuscripts where scribes needed to mark chapter breaks when ink froze and became unworkable. Winter's culinary legacy survives in our holiday feasts. The Christmas gingerbread house descends from medieval Lebkuchen protein-rich cakes designed not for decoration but emergency winter nutrition. Fruitcake's notorious density was originally a virtue, allowing it to last through months of cold storage. Even our eggnog carries the ghost of medieval posset, an ale-based winter drink that combined calories, alcohol, and warmth in one survival beverage. Modern psychology is rediscovering medieval winter coping mechanisms. The Danish concept of hygge coziness as spiritual practice directly descends from peasant strategies for winter sanity, the careful cultivation of small comforts against fast cold. Researchers find medieval winter journals show remarkable psychological sophistication, with authors practicing what we'd now call gratitude journaling or cognitive behavioral therapy to combat seasonal depression. Our bodies remain winter's living archives. The winter nose phenomenon, where cold air stimulates extra mucus production, likely protected medieval lungs from freezing damage. Goosebumps, now functionally useless, once raised body hair to create insulating air pockets. Even our tendency to argue more in winter may stem from ancient survival instincts. Medieval court records show disputes over firewood and food storage peaked in January, suggesting conflict helped enforce fair resource distribution. The season's technological legacy surrounds us. The first thermometers were winter sticks, marked rods that measured ice thickness for safety. Refrigeration owes its existence to medieval ice houses, where snow was packed with straw for summer use. Even modern central heating descends from Cistercian monks' hypocaust systems, perfected during the Little Ice Age to warm their scriptoriums. As climate change makes winters unpredictable, these ancient adaptations become cultural ballast. When a power outage strands modern families in the cold, it's medieval knowledge, layering clothes, sealing drafts, sharing body heat, that keeps them alive. Survival experts now study peasant winter techniques, finding them often more effective than high-tech alternatives in prolonged crises. The greatest medieval winter wisdom wasn't about surviving the cold, but preserving warmth, of community, of hope, of shared humanity. Their snowbound villages perfected the art of winter telling, gathering to share stories that kindled inner fire when the hearth burned low. Our holiday gatherings, winter book clubs, and even Netflix binge-watching all descend from this ancient recognition that winter is best endured together. So when you next complain about scraping ice off your windshield, pause. That ice connects you to every human who ever trembled through a winter night. The medieval world whispers through frost ferns on your window. Winter is not your enemy, but your oldest teacher. Its harsh lessons shape the comfort you now take for granted, and its wisdom may yet save us when modern systems fail. The medieval winter's most enduring legacy may be its paradoxical gift, the very concept of comfort we now take for granted. Modern thermal imaging of reconstructed peasant homes reveals a startling truth. The temperature near the hearth rarely exceeded 10 degrees Celsius 50 degrees Fahrenheit, yet contemporary accounts describe these spaces as cozy and warm. This discrepancy exposes a profound psychological shift. Medieval people experienced warmth relationally, measuring it against the killing cold outside rather than some absolute standard. Their winter warmth wasn't a temperature but a state of grateful survival, a mindset we've largely lost in our climate-controlled world. Archaeologists excavating medieval latrines find extraordinary evidence of winter adaptation. Preserved gut contents show seasonal shifts in diet, from summer's fresh greens to winter's fermented foods packed with vitamin C to prevent scurvy. Dental calculus reveals how people chewed pine needles for their antiseptic properties when winter prevented toothbrushing. Even parasite eggs tell a story. Roundworm infections decreased in winter as people avoided contaminated frozen water sources, showing sophisticated understanding of disease prevention. The season reshaped human-animal bonds in remarkable ways. Oxen developed specialized winter hooves that splayed wider on ice, a trait still seen in their modern descendants. Cats evolved to curl their tails around their noses while sleeping, creating a natural heat-retaining loop. Most touching are the winter dogs, bred specifically to sleep with sick children, their body temperatures slightly higher than humans to serve as living hot water bottles. These adaptations weren't accidental, but the result of centuries of selective pressure during brutal winters. Winter's influence extended to the highest levels of medieval power. The famous 1356 Golden Bull, establishing the Holy Roman Empire's electoral system, specified winter meeting dates precisely because frozen rivers made military campaigns impossible, creating forced diplomatic pauses we might recognize in modern winter Olympic truces. King Alfred the Great used winter strategically, timing his Viking counterattacks during deep freezes when the Norse ships were locked in ice. Our modern world still runs on medieval wintertime. The financial calendar's January start dates back to when merchants closed their books during impossible winter travel. The academic winter break originated as a necessity for students to help with last-minute harvest preparations before starvation season. Even our holiday lighting displays descend from the winter fires that once burned not for decoration but to literally hold back the lethal darkness. Climate science now confirms what medieval chroniclers recorded. Ice core samples match written accounts of catastrophic winters, while dendrochronology reveals how tree growth nearly ceased during the worst years. The 1601 eruption of Huayna Putina in Peru, which caused global cooling and famines from Russia to Virginia, left its chemical fingerprint in both Arctic ice and the stained glass of European cathedrals, where artisans used cheaper materials when economic collapse struck. Perhaps winter's greatest lesson is about resilience as an active verb. Medieval people didn't just endure winter, they prepared, adapted, and ultimately transformed its challenges into cultural strengths. The Norse Winter Nights festival became our Thanksgiving. The monastic tradition of winter manuscript copying preserved classical knowledge. Even the despised winter cough had value. Epidemiologists note that seasonal respiratory illnesses may have helped medieval populations develop cross-immunities to deadlier plagues. As you adjust your smart thermostat this winter, consider the medieval family who huddled around a single candle, its light magnified by a polished turnip lantern. Our modern comforts are their wildest dreams made material, but have we lost their hard-won wisdom about true warmth? The next time a blizzard knocks out your power, you'll discover that under all our technology, we're still medieval creatures at heart. And that when the wind howls loudest, we still find our way back to each other, just as they did 600 winters ago. The medieval winter's ultimate paradox lies in how its very harshness cultivated humanity's most tender qualities. Modern trauma research reveals an unexpected phenomenon. Communities that endured extreme winters together developed deeper bonds than those in milder climates. Parish records from alpine villages show winter-born children were more likely to be named after local saints than summer babies, a subtle nod to the collective effort required to keep them alive. The winter christening gown, passed between families for generations, became more than fabric. It was a tangible promise that the village would protect its weakest members. Neuroscience now confirms what medieval people lived. The brain's anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for empathy, shows heightened activity during cold exposure experiments. Oxytocin levels, the bonding hormone, spike in prolonged group survival situations. Medieval winter wasn't just endured, it biologically rewired communities for cooperation. The famous Uppsala Winter Code of 1292 mandated that all house doors remain unlocked during blizzards, not out of naivety, but because shared vulnerability created radical trust. Winter's alchemy transformed suffering into art. The exquisite frost psalters illuminated manuscripts where scribes used frozen ink to create crystalline patterns, gave birth to abstract art centuries before Kandinsky. The ice harps of Norway, with strings made from stretched animal gut that changed tone with temperature, anticipated modern experimental music. Even winter's silence found expression. The 15th century snow requiem consisted of rest and breath marks, a composition of absence that would influence John Cage's 4 feet 33 inches. The season's cruel mathematics birthed social innovations. The winter ratio, calculating exactly how many people could share a bed without overheating yet retain maximum warmth, became formalized in almshouse regulations. Monastic kitchens developed precise starvation recipes where a single herring could flavor gallons of soup through careful reuse of boiling water. The famous Bremen clock of 1384 didn't just tell time. Its intricate gears tracked optimal moments to open and shut dampers to conserve heat in the town hall. Modern crisis managers study medieval winter responses as masterclasses in resilience. The 1432 Snow Parliament of Iceland, where lawmakers convened in a buried longhouse for 3 months, established emergency governance protocols still referenced today. Venetian galley captains' winter logs contain the first known examples of triage systems, prioritizing which crew members received scarce wool blankets. Even children's winter games like Fox and Geese, played on snow-etched boards, taught strategic thinking that saved lives during famines. Our bodies remain winter's living archives. The winter tooth phenomenon, where cold-adapted humans develop thicker dental enamel, now causes modern dentists headaches as these super-hard teeth resist drilling. The same genetic mutations that helped medieval Europeans process vitamin D from weak sunlight now make their descendants prone to winter weight gain. Even our circadian rhythms still follow the segmented winter sleep patterns that helped conserve energy in unheated homes. As climate change alters winters worldwide, these ancient adaptations become double-edged swords. Our winter weight genes drive obesity epidemics in sedentary societies. Our light-deprived brains, evolved for winter dormancy, rebel against modern productivity demands. The very traits that ensured survival now complicate lives, a biological debt coming due after centuries of deferred payment. The medieval winter's final lesson may be about time's circular nature. As glaciers retreat, they reveal artifacts perfectly preserved since the Little Ice Age, a wool mitten here, a frozen whetstone there, only to be claimed by modern thaw. These objects carry urgent messages. The Norse winter sticks, used to measure ice thickness, now serve as climate change indicators. Medieval crop failure records help predict modern famine risks. When you next complain about winter, pause. That chill down your spine connects you to every human who ever trembled through December's depths. The medieval world whispers through your goosebumps and holiday traditions. Winter was never our enemy, but the strict teacher who forced us to become our most resourceful, compassionate selves. Its lessons, etched in frost and hunger and shared warmth, remain our most precious inheritance if we're wise enough to remember.